Well, all right. Welcome everybody. Another episode of Legends Sports and Amplify, and we're here just about once or twice a week talking baseball, baseball history, Negro League baseball history, and all those passions and pursuits that go along with it. And I am really happy to have on today, taking some time out of his busy schedule. He's an author, a motivator, poet, photographer, all kinds of things, a Renaissance man. Charles R. Smith Jr., how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you for taking the time. I mean, this project, like I briefly told you before we got started, was to try to get people's work that the book I came across for you, um, that how I found your website was Stars in the Shadows.
Yeah.
And then I started seeing everything else you were doing, and it's all of that work, and that was 10 years ago, right? You wrote that book.
That was a while ago now.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
you've been at this a long time. I've had a lot of other authors and researchers on that. Some of their work goes back, Don Rogerson, back to the 70s, and Phil Dixon. I mean, these guys have been at this for a long, long time and telling the stories. And what I think I've discovered, and I came across, I thought I knew baseball history, and then I told you, in '92, I met many of these guys who were still with us at the time: Buck O'Neill, Lester Lockett, Josh Gibson Jr. Heard those stories, I realized I was missing half the history, right? But there are so many different ways to tell the stories, and I think that's kind of what you sort of stress in your work, right?
Oh, most definitely is I try to show things from a different perspective. You mentioned that I am a photographer as well, so the two really go hand in hand because when I write, I'm thinking like a photographer. I'm establishing the scene, I'm moving
Mm-hmm.
a little closer, showing the details, and then as a writer, I'm doing the exact same thing, but I'm using that camera lens to do that. And then with the camera, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to establish what is the scope of the story. Who are the main characters in the story? What is the detail? And that goes for fiction or nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
Nonfiction, you basically have rules to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Fiction, you have no rules to follow.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, using that photography and writing symbiosis, it really allows me to, tackle a well-worn subject in a different
In
way.
a different way, right? Um,
Yeah.
so one of the things, I had Dr. James Brunson on back way one of my first half dozen. I've done about 137 of these interviews over the last year and a half, and a
Wow.
couple
Good
people have
for
been on
you.
more than once as they come out with
Uh,
more work. Phil Dixon's been on more than once, a couple other people, but it's been so much fun to share these stories
yeah.
because it gives people, hey, I really like this. This is a passion of mine. This is what I like, and a way for them to maybe feel that they can do it too, which is I think important. And so what I like to hear when I talk to people is if you could share your origin story. Dr. Brunson called it that. These early black baseball players,
Mhm.
and the history of the game from that perspective that most people don't know about. There's an origin to it, and so I'd love to
Yeah.
hear how you got to where you are, from where you started. I think
Yeah.
it's always a fascinating thing to hear.
Yeah. Yes, I do have a fun origin story, actually, particularly when it comes to being a children's book author. So I'm
Hmm.
originally from Los Angeles, California. I went to elementary and junior high school, specifically in Compton, California.
Nice.
And then before I started high school, my mom decided to move us out of the city, basically, and moved us to the valley, to the San Gabriel Valley, where I moved to Duarte. Um, while I was in elementary and junior high school, I became a voracious reader, mostly through my parents, but also through my education, mostly through my parents in elementary school, but then through my education in junior high school, because we had a very strict disciplinarian principal because of where the school was, kind of had to be.
Hmm.
But we were one of the highest ranked junior high schools in the country because of our academic record. So I had this great base of writing when we moved away. And I immediately ended up in honors English and things like that. Writing just became very easy for me. Um, the story that I tell when I speak in schools is how, I basically begin at eighth grade. And eighth grade is when things really start to change. That's when you start thinking about
Hmm.
what you're going to be when you grow up. Even if you don't know exactly, those thoughts start coming into your head.
Hmm.
And when I was a kid, the space program was really big. So I thought I'd be an astronaut. So, in addition to being a spy, in addition to being all these other things that kids want to be, astronauts stuck the longest because I actually figured out a path to do it.
Hmm.
Um, and the first part was going to college. And my parents always wanted me to go to college anyway. So I knew I was going to be going to college. Um, and so in the process of wanting to go to college, I needed to expand the amount of activities that I did. So I joined my high school yearbook staff as a writer, but a yearbook is mostly photographs. So we all had to learn how to take pictures. And since
Nice.
I played sports, that's what they had me take pictures of. I fell in love with it right away, got good. I don't want to say right away, but I was interested in becoming better. And that was about my junior, senior year in high school. So I decided that's what I want to do, be a professional photographer. So I found a college to study just photography because I really hated taking standardized tests. As
Right.
great as as great as I was at writing, tests were just not my thing. And I had some teachers that identified that. Thankfully, they didn't go strictly off of that. They knew better, which helped me know better.
Hmm.
And I think that's a big thing when you're a writer or when you're any kind of pursuing any kind of artistic endeavor is where your weakness is and saying, you know what, I'm not going to force this weakness on me. I'm going to play to my strength.
Hmm.
So I wanted to become a photographer anyway. So that meant showing what I could do as a photographer. But to get into the school, I still needed college credit and things like that. So I actually ended up having to talk my way into the college English class because I failed the test enough that I couldn't get in for the summer so that I can enter in time to start. Talk my way in, because I was confident in myself. And I say all this because it's funny that the bulk of what I do now is for writing, yet I'm not truly formally trained in writing.
Hmm.
You know, my degree is in photography, you know, and
Interesting.
when I decided to start college, I knew that when I graduated, I would move to New York. So I was really focused on that track. The writing came back into play when I was in New York City and I started photographing these groups of these individual upcoming performing poets. They were
Cool.
performing in these different clubs around New York City. I kind of fell into that scene. And as a photographer, I wanted to meet them, take pictures, because that's what I wanted to do. Got some great shots, but also I'm seeing this poetry. And I was always great at writing. And I kind of started dusting that skill off again. And so by the time I sat down to a children's book publisher, showing my portfolio in hopes of doing one book cover, just one, they saw this collection of basketball photographs that I had done on my own, just as a personal project, and said, "You should make these into a book."
Nice.
And I said, "Well, I'm a writer as well, so I can write it too," you know, putting it together right then. And they said, "Okay, boom, there you go." And that became my very first book, Rim Shots.
Cool. What year?
Once
What year was that?
that was in 1999.
Okay.
So one of the questions that people often ask is, how do I become an author? How did you do it? I tell them,
Hmm.
well, I kind of snuck in the back door. But at the same time, I think of one of my favorite quotes, which is something to the effect of, luck is preparation meets opportunity.
Hmm.
You
Opportunity.
know,
That's right.
you're ready for something, and somebody just says, "Hey," because the fact of the matter is, when they said you should turn these pictures into a book, I could have been like, nah, children's books, nah, I don't want to do that. Because the
Hmm.
track that I was on was going up the professional photographer route.
Hmm.
I wanted a studio in Manhattan. I had worked for these guys. I wanted to be traveling the world, taking pictures for Sports Illustrated and ESPN, because that's what I was doing, when I first moved to the city as an assistant, I was
Hmm.
on that track.
Hmm.
So to basically say, wow, okay, this book thing, let's try that.
Let's try
Let's
that.
try something I haven't done for 15 years. Let's
Hmm.
try that. you know.
Boy, you said something just then that it keeps coming up a lot in these discussions I've had with people. But having opportunity, right? I mean, the story of the Negro Leagues was these men, these players, were denied those opportunities, right? And so
Yeah.
every time I have on, and I've had on, not just authors of books. But also researchers, statisticians, people who are into all sorts of things. And one of the things that, kind of gets a little bit jumbled up is trying to take statistics that are incomplete and paint a picture of a player or a career. And the thing I keep coming back to is that it is what it is right now, and unfortunately, because of the history being lost and what caused that, the Jim Crow, the racism of the day, right? But the fact that that opportunity that never came about, how do you even quantify that? And your story, I think, is a great example of that. It's you could have all the skills in the world, but if you're not in that place at that time to make it happen, and yes, you have to go and make it happen at that point.
Yeah.
But it's an important part of everybody's story, really. I mean, not just ours and the Negro Leagues, but
Oh,
anyway,
sure.
so you mentioned also children's books, right? So what made you pick that genre? I guess would be.
Well, so this is where, I really think fate or destiny, however you want to look at it, played a role in my success because the name, when I reached out to this children's book publisher, the only reason I reached out for the name is when I left the studio that I was working as an assistant at, the photographer allowed me to raid his Rolodex. And one of the numbers that I called for this children's book publisher, I thought it was just there because he had done a book deal with it. But it turns out his old studio manager, it was his ex-girlfriend. She was the one that worked there. So it had nothing to do with the professional,
Wow.
thing. It just happened to be in the Rolodex for that reason. So that's why I chose that specific children's book publisher. Now, I also, part of the reason I moved to New York is I wanted to do photographs of all sorts, including book covers. So it wasn't like out of the realm that I would be interested in doing a book cover because I had actually, some of my first assignments were mystery novel covers,
Interesting.
which I had hoped to continue doing. And so I
Cool.
wanted to,
Wow.
keep branching out. So
Hmm.
in that regard,
Hmm.
that it opened that door
Hmm.
for that specific children's book because I hadn't, I
It's
wouldn't have thought of children's books.
it's near and dear to me though, because I mentioned my wife is a teacher. She's a bilingual teacher here in the Houston area, and there are so many great works that I know. I've been to these school libraries. It's like, why aren't these in these libraries? Why are people not able to see these? I mean, there's a lot of great. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great books in there, but so many more. And so I'm hoping as this goes along here, I can help maybe start somewhere to get these back into
Yeah, sure.
circulation again, because it's important. The young readers. That's I have three boys. Reading is important. Education, and you mentioned that at that early age, something clicks, and it either does or doesn't, and your life path is going to be dependent on a lot of those things clicking, right? so
Mhm.
S-
Indeed.
So you have a lot of different subjects. I mean, I look behind you. You've got your book on the song for Jimmy with Jimi Hendrix. You've written books on
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali. You've written books on Negro League baseball history, the 1934. I'm going to talk about that one a little bit in a little bit. But and I want to go to your website too, so people can see this. But all kinds of other subjects as well. You mentioned your basketball books, but you have touched on a lot of different subjects. What makes you pick anything in particular?
It's funny because I had a virtual school visit this morning, and that was one of the questions
Nice.
was how do you choose your subjects? And the big thing that I stress to kids is because I'm talking to them also, this was a junior high school, middle school group. So this is where careers start coming into play. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to get them to think a little bit more about that. And basically, in that regard, I basically just I said that the great thing about what I do is that you can choose any subject. So it depends on what you're interested in. So if you have a lot of interests, then it's very easy to explore those interests.
Hmm.
And in this regard, I'm emphasizing them to them the importance of reading, expanding your knowledge. But when it comes to me personally, what the reason that I choose things is it basically it has some sort of a connection to me in some sort, if it's something generated by me. I have had some of my editors have, reached out in terms of some ideas that I've executed. Um, but mostly if they're self-generated, it's something that's inspired me in some kind of way. So in the case of the biographies, it's always going to be somebody that was kind of an underdog that broke a barrier. And even
Hmm.
though I'm writing mostly about Black people, um, that's the perspective that I'm taking. So
Hmm.
even in the case of Muhammad Ali, we don't think of him as an underdog, but when you look at his life, you see that to become the champion, he was. Black Jack Johnson, you see that he was an underdog because of the time period, simply. He was a black fighter, wanted to fight a white
Hmm.
fighter when white fighters did not fight black fighters.
Right.
So he was an underdog. I have a book coming out this fall called Bessie the Motorcycle Queen about a Black woman who, and this is
Hmm.
a true story, who's ridden her motorcycle, who at the age of 18, during the late 1920s, early 30s, she rode her motorcycle solo across the United States, just crisscrossing and, living her life. So even though she didn't break a barrier in terms of the same way that a Muhammad Ali or Jack Johnson did, she is still somebody that can inspire others strictly by making a decision to do something and then doing it no matter what. That's a key element in my biographies. I mean, that's the perfect, rationale for, Jimi Hendrix. He
Hmm.
decides he's going to be a guitar superstar. So that's the path he works on, and he works tirelessly, on it. And I try to, with the biographies, I try to peel back, the layer up to when they were a kid, because we often think of these, pro anything, professional anything athletes or, singers, musicians, whatever. We think of them as only finished products, as only
Hmm.
them
Right.
now. We don't think of them as when we were our age, if we were little, 10-year-old. We
Hmm.
don't think of them that way. What motivated them to pick up that instrument? What motivated them to want to box?
Hmm.
What motivated them to do those things? So that's what I look at when I'm doing the biographies.
Awesome.
Then when it comes to the sports poetry, I look at sports that I enjoy watching with the best players. So one of the books that I actually, and I'll book this one right now just for you. In a few years, I have another book coming out on the Negro Leagues called Black Diamond Kings,
Nice.
which isolates 12 players from the Negro Leagues, that gives it what I would call my Hoop Kings treatment,
Cool.
where I have a poem that represent each. And
Awesome.
since it's Negro Leagues and I couldn't do photographs for it, it's going to be illustrated. That's why it's going to be out in a few years.
Oh, that the Frank Morrison illustrations in that book.
Yeah,
Boy, oh, Stars and the Shadows are beautiful. I mean,
yeah,
they are
so good.
just fantastic. Now, interesting thing though about your career, you've won not just the Coretta Scott King author, you also won one as an illustrator too, right?
I did.
What book was that for?
That was for my book, My People, which is a Langston Hughes poem, which I did photographs for.
Awesome.
It's actually up on the shelf over here. There it is.
Beautiful.
That is the book.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I when I talk to kids, adults make a bigger deal about the awards. I'm very proud of the awards. I don't diminish them at all. But I don't speak so much of them to kids
Mhm.
because they either
Yeah.
like the book or they don't.
They don't. Yeah, they do or they don't, right?
and
Yeah.
and I appreciate that because um, it's an award. So it can,
Mhm.
some people love awards, some people hate awards.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
take
yeah.
them for what they're worth. I enjoyed being recognized in that regard as a photographer. Actually, the first American photographer and only the second photographer to win that award.
Awesome, awesome. And I mentioned, a couple things near and dear to me here. I mean, my wife is from Guadalajara, Mexico originally. Been here a
Mhm,
long time, teacher. And so your books, I Am America and I Am the World, are
mhm.
very, very pertinent. I mean, we talk about these things all the time about looking beyond things like obvious the obvious one, color of someone's skin. I mean, and seeing who that person is, what they are, how
Yeah,
what their value is, and that's why, like I said, I really apprecited those books that you did as
yeah,
well. And you didn't just stick to men's sports too, right? You did a hoop queens too, right?
yeah. I did
Yeah,
Hoop Queens. That basically in the next couple of years, I have a whole series coming out. Hoop Queens 2 is coming out,
cool,
following up on Hoop Kings 2. Soccer Queens, doing that
nice,
too. I'm not, the funny thing is, like the Soccer Queens book, like that was not my initial idea. But when my editor reached out to me about doing it, I says, oh, yeah, I love watching the, US women's soccer team. I'm not necessarily a fan of the sport, but I love watching them play. So it was a natural fit. If she would have asked me to write about hockey, specifically a whole book on hockey, that'd be a lot tougher for me personally because it's just not one of my favorite sports or one that I watch.
right?
So, that
Yeah,
plays into,
I'm with you.
what I write about as well.
hmm I grew up a fan of all sports, but yeah, that one has never been high on my list. Even though I grew up in the Northeast, I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Philly sports fan. Even though I'm down here in Texas now, I'm never going to not be a Philly sports fan. So
yeah.
um, I want to go out to your website in a little bit and just kind of cruise through it while we're talking. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on that book and the style that you did it, because I enjoyed reading Stars in the Shadows as an adult. Didn't matter. I mean, it was written, yes, for, I'm going to guess probably, middle school, maybe into early high school on down, I'm guessing. But
Yeah, like
the
early middle school. Yeah.
but the way you wrote it was, I thought, was brilliant. I mean, I grew up in the '70s is when I kind of came of age, started playing little league, became a fan. Most things run the radio. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
television set I had, it had three channels and PBS, and there were baseball games on. Like now, there was no internet, there was none of that, right? So I
Yeah.
grew up a radio guy. I had a little transistor radio that my parents bought me that the antenna broke off on me, but it was my prized possession. I still have it, by the way.
Mhm.
And when the way you wrote that, Lester Roberts, is that a real person, or did you just kind of pull him out of the?
Well, one of the fun things about doing this book is, or any book that I have to populate with names, I just usually use family names.
Okay,
So Lester would be my grandfather's actual name,
nice,
my
cool,
father's father name. Robert is my middle name, which is of my father's middle name. A number of the restaurants and like the barbershop, Smitty's Barbershop, uh, Sweet Amelia's Soul Cuisine. That's my grandmother. Her name is
nice.
Amelia. And that and I'm glad you mentioned that in particular because the first decision that you have to make as an author when you're telling a story is how are you going to tell it,
Yes, what
even if it's
perspective? Yeah.
poetry. Yeah, what perspective, what
Mm-hmm.
voice. And I chose the radio voice because the first hurdle that you and I wouldn't even think of, I had to think about this because I speak, to kids directly a lot, is you and I understand that there's a Negro League baseball.
Mm-hmm.
A 10-year-old today does not understand that.
No.
Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why do the black people only play with the black people?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Like
Mm-hmm.
that just
That's
makes
right.
no sense.
Mm-hmm.
So first you have to get them to understand this is how it was in this time period.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you have to populate it with things of the time period. And so one way to do that is a radio. How would you be procuring the game? You can't watch it. You might be able to watch it. I don't think TV was invented, back
Mm-hmm.
then. Or if it was, it costs so much that not everybody had one the way they do
Right.
now. But everybody did certainly have a radio. So since you have a radio, okay, where is the game taking place? And then you start filling in, you basically start creating this world. And I'm not really creating so much as I'm representing it. I didn't have to choose where the game is going to happen. The game actually happened in Chicago. I didn't have to choose the players. These are the actual rosters. Then I just focused on creating the real atmosphere. So that's where when I reached out to the Negro League Baseball Museum and I had some questions. One of the
Ah.
questions was, how does the game start? And they said, oh, they would sing the Negro National Anthem. And when I was in elementary school,
Ah.
we sang that too. We would perform our pledge and then we would sing the Negro National Anthem. So I understood that. So, those things help make it actually a game. So it's like you're there watching. Then I decided, well, part of what makes the Negro League so special is the connection that other people have to it. Because it's, today we look at baseball as a real form of entertainment. And, we still look up to these guys in terms of their athletic abilities and such. But, if you're a town, you're Birmingham, Alabama, and you don't have much, but you have the Black Barons, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you have that team. And since they're your home team, you get to see the Kansas City Monarchs. You get to
Yes.
see, all of these other teams, every kind of giant,
You're right.
box,
Mm-hmm.
pass through. So, and these guys are your heroes because they're to you, a young, black boy, black girl, family member in that city. You're seeing these men do things that is on the level of the professionals
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking up to them. And so I wanted to acknowledge that with the fans in the stands
Mm-hmm.
section, acknowledging the diversity of people that are sitting there and how close, it ties in the community. Like the one girl is there with her father and she's looking for Josh Gibson, and
Mm-hmm.
she's like, oh, I heard all about you, and I wanted to use that aspect to emphasize this mythology behind the players in that, if you're your dad, and you got to see, Bullet Joe Rogan, you get to tell your son so he can tell his son about seeing Satchel Paige, like that just becomes a
Mm-hmm.
part of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to show that connection with the fans in the stands. And then the commercials was a way to remind you of what the time was. So, we have something for a ballroom to advertise a type of music, a bookstore to advertise the popular poets and authors of the day,
Mm-hmm.
a soul food cuisine to
Cool.
represent where many of the people came from in Chicago, because the
Mm-hmm.
Black population in Chicago was mostly from the South,
Mm-hmm.
which is where a lot of these teams are from.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that puts you in 1934.
It's beautiful.
So that when you listen to the words, okay, it makes sense. This is the Negro Leagues. Like, okay, this now we're at the game. This is what it is.
All I had to do was read the very first sentence or two, and I was already hooked. I've got it here. I just want to read it.
Mhm.
August 1934. Welcome to Chicago. Welcome all. It's a beautiful day to play baseball. Bright sun with not one single cloud in the sky. A blue curtain backdrop to watch baseballs fly. Hello, everybody, to you from me, Lester Roberts, on your radio on WNLB. And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh my God. I mean, I could hardly wait every single day coming home from school, eat dinner, do what you had to turn on the radio and listen to, at the time it was Harry Callis and Richie
Yeah,
Ashburn doing the Philly games. And it just
yeah,
brought back all these memories. And as you go through it and the next page you talk about lift your voices and sing, and so many other things. I just loved it. I thought the book was fantastic, and the way you did it was unique that I had never seen. Like a radio broadcaster was telling
Yeah,
history, but in a way that, because radio broadcasters, even television announcers, even though you're seeing it, they are telling a story as well, and the radio is much more important, the
yeah,
way they describe things. So I'm going to
yeah.
go ahead and I'm going to, just for a minute so I could just tick through them. And while we're talking about it, I want to bring up your website, and I'm just going to flip through it, and people, so people can see your other works. One of the things I wanted to ask you about as well. So you're an author, a researcher, a poet, illustrator, photographer, but you're doing some other things as well when it comes to fitness and other aspects, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how that all ties in with what your mission is here.
Yeah, well, one of the things that when I speak to kids in schools, the presentation is actually called Mind, Body, Spirit.
Hmm.
And the focus is on developing those three things for success. It took me years to kind of figure that out, but they were actually always things that I worked on equally. And that allowed for this kind of a balance for me to succeed. And it wasn't until I actually paid attention to it that I was like, oh, okay. And so the mind part is focusing on, books, educating yourself,
Hmm.
not just in reading stories and such, but learning how to do stuff, acquiring knowledge.
Hmm.
Um, the body is focusing on taking care of yourself, not just taking care of yourself, but challenging yourself.
Hmm.
Because when you challenge your body, your mind and your spirit grows. Spirit not having any religious connotation, just simply reflecting motivation and inspiration.
Hmm.
You know, if your body, if you think, you just can't do something and all of a sudden your body does it, it allows your changing or your thought process to change. So that was the case with me years
Interesting.
ago. Years ago, when I tried to do this basic gymnastics move called an L sit. It's when you're basically you're on your hands and then your legs extend straight out in front of you, creating an L. It's not the most difficult thing for a gymnast to do. It's literally one of the very first things that they learn how to do. But for us regular humans, it can be pretty difficult. And so the first time you try to do it, the muscles, particularly that are hard, are your quads. They literally lock up because you're putting that kind of stress on it.
Hmm.
So I say all this because the moment that I first tried it, everything locked up within a second. And I'm like, oh my God, this is impossible. So then as soon as I said that word impossible, because I knew better, I don't think that way. I don't think things are impossible. I says, it's not impossible. You just got to break it down. And I says, okay, I'll set a goal of 1 second. 1 second doesn't seem like much, but if you can't even do 1 second, then 1 second is plenty. So it took a while. I hit my 1 second. 1 second became 2 seconds, became easy 90 seconds with the leg weight, all over time because I set that goal and I kept pursuing it. So around that time, what kind of motivated me is my son and I started training at this Ninja Warrior gym. And I
Ah.
say Ninja Warrior gym very loosely because at the time they literally had like one or two things and the guys were literally making stuff up. But this guy that I worked out with at the gym, he invited me and my son. So we went and they liked the way I was moving and such. And they're like, you should try out for the show. And I was like, nah, I'm too old. And they're like, yeah, that's why you should try out because you're older than us. So that
Wow.
was the big carrot was the fact that I was older than them. So I says, okay. And then I told them like, what do you do? And I'm like, I write books. And I'm like, oh, even better,
It's a great
and so
story. Yeah.
I got myself onto American Ninja
That
Warrior.
is awesome. When was that?
Uh,
What year was that?
that was season 9. That was 4 years ago now.
That is
Well, four to
awesome.
five years ago now,
Oh
depending
my
on
God.
when it airs. So, but basically, yeah, it was season 9. It was in Cleveland, which was actually a
Awesome.
pretty fun and memorable city for me in a number of ways because the first time I went there was as an assistant. We did the NBA's Greatest 50 basketball players of all time. That was the assignment. So I got to meet all 50 of the greatest
Oh
NBA
my
players.
goodness, right?
The second time I went back was to get an award for my Muhammad Ali book, um, which became the inspiration for my Jimi Hendrix book. Because when I got the Muhammad Ali book, they took us to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, which gave me the idea for the Jimi Hendrix book. So I was looking forward to doing well in Cleveland since it had done well for me in the past. But alas, I fell on the third obstacle, but I was just happy to be there.
And the thing about all of these experiences that you're telling me, I can relate to a lot of them. Funny you said about ninja. My youngest, I have three boys. One's in the Navy, one's in just started college, and then a 6-year-old. Right? We just started him in Taekwondo classes just to have something to do because it's hot as heck here in Houston, and being outside in the summertime is not the best. But we call it ninja school because that gets him like, oh yeah, I'm going to ninja school.
Yeah,
But what
yeah,
you're talking about just got me to reflect on this. You know, he's going to be 6 in October, but when I see him, how he's grown exactly the way you're talking about, taking that next step when he's like, oh, I can't do this, I can't. But then once he began to concentrate and took that first step, and now he's starting to get his routines, and it's funny as heck to watch a little 6-year-old
yeah,
out there because most of the kids are a little bit older than him. But
yeah.
I get what you're saying. It takes that next step because then you could take the next step beyond that, and it's an important thing. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm still out here on your website because I've been flipping through your books, and you've got a teacher's lounge out here with a lot of teachers' resources and things that they can download, videos, poetry, bookmarks, all kinds of cool things. I'm going to have to make sure I know a lot of teachers. So,
Spread the
yes,
word.
I am going to help make sure I spread the word. So you mentioned earlier some of the things you're working on now. What else you got coming down the pike here?
Well, the book
I'm going to
that
put you
the
back
next
on.
book that's coming out is going to be, like I said, Bessie, the Motorcycle Queen.
Mm-hmm.
Very excited for that story to become coming out because a lot of publishers passed on it, which happens,
Yeah,
but to me, it was more her story just was such a no-brainer. It
boy.
was just like, why is it getting passed on? Like when you see it, when you see what she did, it's so amazing. And so I'm just really, really happy that that's coming out. And the illustrator just really killed it. This was her first book, and she did a great job on that. After that, I'm not sure exactly which one comes out. I want to say it's the next soccer book, the Soccer Queens, because next year should be the Women's World Cup,
Mm-hmm.
and it's coming out in time for that. Um,
Yeah, timing is probably important on a lot of things that you're doing as well, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean,
yeah.
ultimately, the books will be out beyond that initial burst, but you want to be able to establish a footing, right
Mm-hmm.
away with certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have some other biographies and such that I've turned in. I did a biography on Major Taylor, who was a black
Oh,
bicycle racing champion.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm real excited for that book to be coming out. I just completed a book on Mae Jemison, the first black female
Boy,
astronaut. Real excited. That won't be out for a few years because I literally just turned it in. But uh, so I've
boy.
done some biographies, and I'm looking in other directions. Looking to do more photography based work where I'm still writing, but I'm doing both.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the great things and unfortunate things of children's books is we use illustrators, and there's so many great illustrators right now, but there's also so many great projects. And if you want to wait on a great illustrator, you're going to be waiting a while.
Mm-hmm.
That just is going to be the reality. And in some instances, it's worth it because it just, it's that's how they happen. But
Mm-hmm.
given that I am a visual artist myself, uh, the types of books that I've been focusing on haven't allowed me to do that so much, meaning like more biographies. Biographies are really hard for me to illustrate because it's biography,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a poetry collection or a story, those are a lot easier for me to do. So that's
Hmm.
the direction that I'm pursuing more of.
Hmm.
Even with the nonfiction, just pursuing it in a really unique, way, if it relates to sports or,
Hmm.
poetry and such.
Hmm. And boy, there are a lot of stories. Every day on Twitter, I try to put out something on that next tier. I've had several authors on who wrote books about that. There's so much out there about the Satchel Pages and the Josh Gibsons
Yeah.
and the Cool Papa Bells. My favorite player, Cool Papa Bell. But
Yeah.
um, that next tier down, all of these thousands of them that played over that course of time, that all had important stories and made impacts on their community and on lives beyond just baseball. And boy, there's so much out there. I, the same thing that happened with Negro League baseball happened with horse racing. The
Yeah.
stories of Jimmy Wingfield and some of the jockeys from the late 1800s into the 1900s that just disappeared from horse racing, that their stories need to be told. There was African American auto racing going on, segregated
Yeah.
auto racing going
Exactly.
on, and drag racing and all kinds of things. Bicycle, you mentioned, so many things and these stories. And yeah, I bet that question that you mentioned earlier about uh, um, today, most young people they would ask, why, how did this, why was that going on, and what do you tell
Yeah.
them, what do you tell them about that when that question comes up?
I basically just say, this is how sports in our country have evolved. I mean, that's just, it's a part of history. And, that's why, like even using the title Negro League, some people don't like using that because they don't
Right.
like the word Negro. It's like, well, you know what? That's what it was called back then. So that's
Right.
what it's called,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And just acknowledging things like that helps get you in that mindset, because the moment you want to change, and like all of a sudden you want to change everything else about
And it's
it.
sugarcoating it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
No,
so
I'm with you. I don't understand why it's such, to tell the history the way it was. Why that would
yeah,
be touchy to some people. I
yeah,
live in an area that it's a little touchy, and I
yeah,
don't get it. I mean, it
yeah,
it it happened. Acknowledge it. Kind of
yeah,
take a step and learn from it. That's really
yeah.
what this is
And
all about.
that's really what it comes down to. Because if you don't learn from your future or from your past, you're doomed to repeat it. And
Absolutely.
too many if don't even know it. And that's the tough and tricky part about it, because like I said, I just completed Black Diamond Kings, and so I'm writing it in this time
Hmm.
period. And I'm mindful of stuff, but I never let anything stop me, in that regard. I always stick to the time period. If this is what this person was called in that time period, this is what they're called as it relates to that time period. I'm
Hmm.
not changing anything.
Hmm.
So in that regard, just putting a little bigger perspective on these players' role, because part of how I ended up getting that deal was from when Negro League records stats began being
Hmm.
recognized.
Hmm.
And I said, this is going to be big, because
Hmm.
now all of these stars, literally, that were in the shadows,
Hmm.
now they are compared apples to apples with Babe Ruth, with,
Hmm.
and even still, it's a little different, because obviously different eras, and they weren't as accurate and such. But one of the things that I'll say in relation to like the steroid era, because people talk about that era and like,
Hmm.
oh, that this person shouldn't be this person.
Hmm.
I said, look, Babe Ruth never faced a prime Satchel Paige.
Hmm.
you know, um,
You know who else he never
Bobby Ford
faced?
never.
You know who else he never faced? He never faced a prime Grover Cleveland Alexander, who was
Exactly.
playing in the National League, because there was an American League and a National League, and they never played each other unless it was the World Series, maybe a little bit of barnstorming. No one has any problem with that.
Exactly.
Why would they have a problem with the Negro Leagues?
Exactly. But my point is, like, when it comes to the steroid era, we act like there weren't certain, the fact of the matter is the white players of Babe Ruth's era, they did not compete against black players.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different game back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mentioned that only because baseball in our country is that of errors.
Mm-hmm.
We had the steroid era. Everybody knew. But if the batter and the pitcher are on steroids, doesn't that kind of cancel each other
Cancel each
out?
other out, right?
you know
Yeah.
but and then also, like I said, if the top white pitchers of the day are not facing the Josh Gibson, the cool Papa Bells of the
Mm-hmm.
day, there's that. And
Mm-hmm.
so you just take them, the errors, for what they are,
Mm-hmm.
and understand that the greatness about many of the Negro League players being a part of the conversation is that they played against their white counterparts in the barnstorming games. And
Mm-hmm.
so they held them in high regard. And so their stats were not so much inflated as people would be likely to believe.
Right. That's always been something that when I have had researchers on, the stats that are in there, they're not including all the barnstorming games. It's only league games,
Exactly.
because fact was, I mean, there were white players, Babe Ruth, like you mentioned, they were barnstorming at the time as well. It was a way to make money, a way to make a living. That was why you did it, and so that was, fact is, they are major leagues. Just like there was a National League and an American League, and they didn't play each other unless they met in the World Series. This was the Negro National League at the time, and then whatever the other six that they've also included, Negro American League and
Yeah.
and so forth. So, yeah, stop with the major league equivalencies. They are
Yeah.
major league, and like you mentioned, it just so happened they didn't play each other. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. So, um,
Exactly.
anyway, I like I said, I love, I appreciate the conversation. You taking the time. You said you were doing a talk, virtual. You do a lot of those because after the pandemic, or did you do them before the virtual?
I all virtual after the pandemic,
Hmm.
not by choice, but just by default.
So did you
I
go out?
actually,
Did you go out to schools in person
oh
before
yeah, I
that?
went out to schools regularly. I was big on, very popular in schools. Get to travel to a lot of schools. It slowed down a little bit in more recent years, only because my new books had slowed down. And so I still, I have enough of a catalog that I can continue, but some things slowed down just a little bit because I didn't have regular books coming out. But that started
Man,
changing, and I started getting more virtual visits once the pandemic hit. And I actually did my first in-person visit in 2 years just 2 weeks ago. So
do you know Phil Dixon? Have you ever met Phil? The
I don't know if I have.
he
Is it the Negro League Museum? Because his name
he
sounds
he is one of the co-founders way back when, but he's been writing books since a long time back in the 70s, 80s, all the way through. Helped tell those stories. Been an advocate. Written a number of books, right? But he went on just before the pandemic. He did like a 200 and some city tour, barnstorming all the way up into like British Columbia on down to to follow the path of the Negro League barnstorming tours up into Canada from Kansas City, where area where he was from. And
uh,
and I'll tell you what, I mean, there's something about being there in person, right? Even though this is great to be able to do this, there is something about that personal connection.
oh yeah, for sure.
But without this, I'll tell you what, this has made a lot more things possible. Being able to do things like this virtually. So,
Oh yeah. No, it's
but
great. Oh,
I do appreciate your time. This was great. I mean, so now we can add. I'll have to make sure I add that on there when I send this out again. Not just author, illustrator, poet, photographer, but American Ninja warrior as well. So that's very
yeah,
cool. You were definitely a Renaissance man. I'll tell you.
thank you.
But thank you so much. I'd love to keep in touch. And like I said, when I get some things together, I've been working on for the last maybe month or two with some other authors to try to get some of these works back in there, in
Yeah,
and approaching school districts, because
yeah,
there's a lot of great work out there that I think
yeah, for
kids
sure.
would enjoy and are pertinent and would really be great to get them back out there. So. So
Oh,
thank you.
great.
Be safe. Be well out there, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks again, Philip. Thanks so much.
All right, Charles. Bye bye.
All right. Take it easy.